Starting with your next paycheck, all your money will go straight into my account." Those were the words my son Bryce said to me that Thursday afternoon while casually sipping coffee in my kitchen. He spoke as if he were suggesting something ordinary, almost like he was doing me a kindness. As if a 62-year-old woman couldn't handle her own life anymore. I just stared at him. For a few long seconds, I didn't say a single word. I searched his face, trying to understand why my own child, the son I raised all by myself, the boy I sacrificed so much for, was suddenly asking for full control of my finances. But there was nothing to find. Only that calm smile of his, the kind someone wears when they believe everything is already decided. So I took a slow breath and told him yes, that it was fine, that I trusted him. His smile grew wider. He stood up, placed a quick, emotionless kiss on my forehead, and said it was for the best, that I wouldn't have to worry anymore, that he'd handle everything. "For your own good," he said. Those words stayed floating in the room long after he left. That evening, like every Friday, Bryce returned, this time with his wife. For 3 years, it had been the same. They arrived expecting dinner on the table, a warm meal waiting, everything prepared the moment they walked in. I heard them come in, the key I had given him turning in the lock, the door opening, and then a sharp, startled scream, the kind someone makes when their world suddenly no longer matches what they imagined. I sat still in the kitchen, in the now empty house, letting the echo bounce off the walls. I didn't need to see what they were looking at. Bryce burst into the kitchen, pale and wide-eyed. His wife followed, wearing the same stunned expression. "Mom," he shouted, "what did you do? Where is everything? The furniture, the TV, why is the house empty?" I looked at him calmly, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. I explained that I had sold a few things, that I needed some cash of my own, especially now that he was going to be in charge of my money. His face changed instantly from pale to bright red. He stepped toward me, and for the first time in my life, I finally saw him clearly. Not as the child I raised, not as the man I helped build a future for, but as a stranger, someone looking at me with irritation, frustration, something that almost felt like resentment. "You've lost it," he snapped. "How could you sell things without checking with me? How are we supposed to relax here now? How are we supposed to watch TV when we come over?" Those words told me everything. How are we supposed to be comfortable here? Not, "How are you doing, Mom?" My home, in his mind, existed for their comfort. Then his wife stepped closer, her voice sharp as she called me the selfish one, saying they visited every week to keep me company, and this was how I chose to thank them. Me. Selfish. Me. The woman who worked double shifts so Bryce could go to school. The woman who put her own life on hold so her son wouldn't grow up in chaos. The woman who wore discount clothes and skipped meals so he never had to go without. Bryce looked at me like I was some sort of problem he needed to manage. Then he said the line that sliced me open. "Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe you're not able to make good decisions anymore. Maybe you need more help than I realized." More help. As if I were no longer capable of running my own life. I stood up. I faced both of them and, louder than I expected, told them there was no dinner, and if they were hungry, they could find a restaurant. The silence that followed felt like a thick wall between us. Bryce stared at me, stunned. His wife gave a cold little laugh, mumbling something about respect. Then Bryce delivered the final sentence, the one that still echoes in my mind at night. "You should be careful. A woman your age, living alone, without real support, things can go badly. I'm the only person you have." "Don't forget that." They stormed out, slamming the door behind them, leaving anger and a warning hanging in the air. I heard them get into the car, heard the engine start, and listened as they drove away. I stood alone in my quiet kitchen, in a house that suddenly felt hollow, and something inside me split open. But it wasn't sadness, it wasn't fear, it was clarity. It was the realization that my son didn't care for me, not in the way a child should. Maybe he never had. To him, I was a supplier, a roof, a meal, a wallet. Nothing more. I sat back down and looked around at the bare walls. the empty corners where furniture bought with years of my effort once stood, and for the first time in ages, I smiled. Because Bryce didn't know the truth. He didn't know I hadn't sold my things for money. I sold them to send a message, to watch how he would react, to confirm what my heart already suspected, and he reacted exactly as expected, with anger, entitlement, and the attitude of someone who believes they deserve what isn't theirs. That night, sitting in the stillness of my empty home, I made a choice. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to plead. I wasn't even going to argue. I was going to observe, and I was going to wait. I would let Bryce believe he had the upper hand, let him think he had control, and when he felt the safest, when he was convinced he had won, I would show him who I truly was. I would show him who Eleanor Ellie Johnson really is. Not the quiet mother he thought he could direct, but the woman who survived a broken marriage, years of financial struggle, and exhausting jobs. A woman who knows exactly how to protect herself, a woman he should never have underestimated. There was a time when I believed being a mother was enough. That love given would always come back. That sacrifice naturally created something strong and lasting, but I learned the hard way that life doesn't always follow those rules. Bryce was born on a stormy night 34 years ago. His father, the man who promised us a future, left when Bryce was only 2, claiming he wasn't ready. I didn't wait for him to return. I couldn't. I was alone with a toddler, a tiny apartment, and a job paying $800 a month. It wasn't enough, not even close. So I worked 2 jobs, days at the office, nights cleaning buildings. I slept 4 hours a night for years. I still remember Bryce begging for the branded sneakers the other kids wore. They cost nearly everything I had for groceries, but I bought them anyway. I wanted him to feel confident. I wanted him to know his mother would always stand behind him. When he turned 18, he wanted a private college, $10,000 a year. I didn't have the money, but I took out a loan anyway. I spent a decade paying it off. He graduated, found a good job, and started earning twice what I made after 30 years of work. And I was proud, so proud. I thought my years of sacrifice had led to something bright. He said he needed to save money before becoming independent. I told him he could stay with me as long as he needed. He stayed 5 years. 5 years in which I paid every bill, bought every meal, covered every cost. He saved his entire salary. When he finally moved out, it was to buy a $300,000 house fully paid in cash because he hadn't spent a cent while living under my roof. And again, I was proud. I thought he might help me now. That maybe I could rest a little. But that moment never came. He married 2 years later. His wife was elegant polished nails, perfect hair, a voice that sounded gentle but always held a touch of frost. From the beginning, she looked at me as if I didn't quite belong. At their $30,000 wedding, I sat at a table in the back, not with the family. Bryce said the main tables were reserved for important people. I said I understood. I smiled for the photos, danced when they asked, and returned home alone, feeling strangely hollow. After the wedding, Bryce's visits slowly faded. Before, he used to come by 2 or 3 times a week. After he got married, those visits turned into once every 2 weeks, then once a month, always rushed, always checking his phone, always finding a reason to leave early. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the difficult mother, the mother who complained, the mother who didn't understand. He had his own life now. But then something changed. They began showing up on Friday evenings, always around dinner time, always without warning, always expecting food to be ready. At first I was excited. I thought maybe Bryce finally wanted to spend time with me. Maybe he missed me. So I cooked his favorite meals, set the table nicely, bought dessert. But little by little I noticed something. Bryce never came alone. His wife was always with him, and they didn't arrive to talk. They came to eat. They sat, ate, and left. Sometimes after an hour, sometimes even sooner. And they never brought anything, not a dessert, not a drink, not even a small contribution to the meal. Nothing. One night after they left, I added up what dinner had cost me, $15. $15 I didn't have. $15 that meant extra hours of work. That's when I understood something painful. To Bryce, I had become a service, a free dining table, a place he could visit when he wanted a hot meal. No effort, no cost, no gratitude. And once I saw that, I began seeing other things too. When I needed help, he always had a reason to say no. When my car broke down and I needed a ride to the doctor, he was busy. When my refrigerator started making strange noises and I worried it might stop working, he told me to just buy a new one, as if I had emergency savings tucked away somewhere. I didn't. Most months, I barely made it to the end. But the worst moment was my 60th birthday. Bryce came 2 hours late. No gift, no card, just an excuse about traffic. He stayed 20 minutes. He ate the cake I had bought for myself so I wouldn't spend my birthday alone. Then he left. That night, I cried. Not because of the cake, not because of the short visit, but because I finally accepted something I had been avoiding for years. To my son, I was no longer someone who mattered. I was simply convenient, a presence that existed when he needed me and vanished when he didn't. And the hardest part was realizing I had allowed it. I had created that pattern. I never asked him for anything. I never said I felt used. I never told him I needed more from him than rushed visits and Friday dinners. I was afraid that if I asked for too much, he would stop coming at all. And the thought of losing him, losing even this version of him, terrified me more than the loneliness. So I kept quiet. I stayed the convenient mother, the silent mother, the mother who was always available, until that Thursday afternoon. Until Bryce told me he wanted control of my money. Something inside me woke up that day, a voice that had been quiet for years, a voice that whispered, "This isn't right. This is the start of something dangerous." But even then, despite everything, I said yes, because a part of me still hoped, still wanted to believe my son cared about me, that he would protect me, that he would do the right thing. How naive I was. The following Monday, Bryce came over with a stack of papers. He spread them out across my kitchen table with a smile that suddenly felt different, less warm, more strategic. "Mom, this is simple," he said. "I just need you to sign here, here, and here. This will let me transfer your paycheck directly to my account. I'll handle your bills for you. You won't have to worry about anything." I looked at the documents. They weren't just bank forms. The fine print revealed something far more serious. It wasn't just access to my account, it was full power of attorney. The authority to move my money, close accounts, and make financial decisions in my name. "Bryce, this says you'd have total control over everything," I whispered. He nodded casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Of course, Mom. It's easier this way. I can take care of everything without bothering you every time. It's just practical." Practical. That word repeated itself in my mind. Practical for him? I didn't say it. I simply held the pen he handed me. And for a moment I was about to sign. I was about to give him everything, just as I always had. Trust, surrender, belief. But then I remembered Friday night. I remembered his anger when he saw the empty house. I remembered his tone, his warning, his assumption that I had no one but him. I placed the pen down. "You know what, Bryce? Give me a few days. I want to read everything carefully. I want to understand what I'm signing." His expression flickered just for a second. Annoyance crossed his face before he forced his smile back into place. "Mom, there's nothing to think about. It's simple. But fine. Take a few days if you need to." That's what Bryce said before walking out of my house, leaving the papers behind as if he already knew I would eventually sign. As if my signature was just a matter of time. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table staring at those documents. Something inside me whispered that this wasn't for my benefit, that once I signed, there would be no going back. The next morning, before work, I went to the bank. I asked the teller to print every transaction from the past 6 months. She handed me several pages. I went through them slowly, line by line, and then I saw it. A withdrawal I never made. $1,200. Gone. My stomach dropped. I asked the teller for details. She checked her screen and said the withdrawal had been made at a branch across the city using my debit card, but I had never been there. And my card had never left my wallet, except once. 3 months earlier, Bryce had come over. I was in the shower when he arrived and told him to let himself in. My purse was in the living room. My wallet was in my purse, and Bryce had been sitting alone in that room while I made coffee. A cold wave washed through me. There was only one explanation. He had taken my card, copied the numbers, and withdrawn my money without my permission. I asked the teller if I could confirm it officially. She said I needed to file a claim, and the investigation could take weeks. I told her I'd think about it. I left the bank feeling like I no longer recognized my own child. But I didn't file the claim. Not yet. I needed to be absolutely certain. I needed to know if this was a single moment of weakness or something much bigger. So I spent the next few days digging through everything I owned, old statements, folders, documents stored in boxes in my closet. And the truth began to surface. I found records from 2 years earlier, when I had been hospitalized with pneumonia. Someone had used my health insurance for appointments I never made. Appointments that completely used up my yearly coverage, which explained why I had to pay for my medication out of pocket. Then I discovered a credit card under my name. A card I didn't remember applying for. A card with a balance of $3,000. $3,000 in purchases I had never made. I called the card company. They told me the account had been opened 18 months ago. I asked where the purchases took place. They listed hardware stores, electronics stores, furniture shops. My son had bought a house 2 years ago. He renovated that house, and it became painfully clear that he had done it using my credit. I sat on the floor, surrounded by papers, feeling my world collapse. It wasn't just the money, it was the betrayal, the realization that my son had been taking from me for years. That he saw me not as his mother, but as an endless resource. I cried until there were no tears left. Then I wiped my face, gathered every document, and made a decision. I wouldn't confront him, not yet, because I knew exactly how he would respond. He'd deny everything. He'd call me confused. He'd suggest I was forgetful. He'd twist everything until I doubted myself. No, I would not play that game. I would be patient. I would gather evidence. I would build a case he couldn't escape. And only then would I act. That Friday, Bryce came at his usual time, expecting dinner, expecting everything to be as it always was. I cooked his childhood favorite, chicken and rice, the meal I used to make for him when he came home upset from school, a meal filled with the love I had poured into his life for decades. He and his wife sat, ate, and chatted casually about work, the weather, a movie they wanted to see. I watched them, truly watched them, and for the first time, I saw how Bryce ate my food with the same detachment someone might have toward fast food. No appreciation, no warmth, just routine. When they finished, Bryce pulled out the bank documents again and placed them beside his empty plate. "Mom, the days you asked for are up. You've thought it through, right? Sign this, and I'll handle everything." I looked him straight in the eyes and said, as calmly as I could, "I'm still not sure. I need more time." His wife scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Ellie, this is ridiculous. Bryce is trying to help you. I don't understand why you're being so suspicious." Distrustful. She called me distrustful. And the saddest part was, she was right. Not in the way she meant, but in the way life had forced me to be. Bryce stood up then. The warm smile he always used as a mask disappeared. His expression hardened. "Mom, this is for your own good. You can't handle your finances anymore. It's obvious. Look at the decisions you're making. Selling your furniture without a plan. It's irrational. Irrational. Selling my own belongings in my own home was irrational, but taking from me for years, that wasn't?" I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. And eventually, he was the one who looked away. They left without a goodbye, and I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the unsigned documents, fully aware that a quiet war had begun. A war I had to win. Because if I lost, it wouldn't just be my savings at risk, it would be my independence, my self-respect, my future. In the days that followed, Bryce didn't call, didn't visit, didn't text. It was clear he wanted to punish me with silence. He expected me to fall apart, to panic, to beg him to come back and take over just so I wouldn't feel alone. But I didn't break. For the first time in years, the silence in my house didn't feel empty. It felt purposeful. It felt like clarity. I spent those days combing through every financial detail of my life, every receipt, every letter, every statement tucked away in drawers and boxes, and the more I looked, the more I found. 3 years earlier, Bryce had asked to borrow my ID, claiming he'd lost his and needed to pick up a package. I thought nothing of it. But now, looking through the records, the truth became clear. He used my ID to open a utilities account for his house. For 3 years, the electricity bill for Bryce's home had been under my name. And when he didn't pay on time, the late fees hit my credit. That was why my loan application had been rejected when I needed repairs for my car. That was why my credit score had mysteriously dropped. I called the utility company. I explained the situation. They told me I needed to file an affidavit officially reported as identity fraud committed by my own son. I hung up and stared at the wall, trying to understand how things had reached this point, trying to recognize the moment when my child turned into someone capable of this. I barely slept that night. I lay awake, listening to the distant hum of the city, thinking about all the excuses I had made for him through the years. How many times I had told myself I was being too sensitive, too demanding, too emotional. But none of this was about expectations. It was about deception. It was about a son who had learned he could take advantage of me without consequences. The next morning I did something I had never done in my life. I went to see a lawyer. It was a small, humble office downtown. The sign on the door read, David Chung. I had seen his ad offering free consultations. I walked in feeling embarrassed. 62 years old, sitting in a lawyer's office, not because of a stranger, but because of my own child. The receptionist was kind and guided me in. Mr. Chung listened to everything, every detail about the missing money, the credit card I never opened, the utility bills in my name, the papers Bryce wanted me to sign. He didn't judge me. He didn't interrupt. He just took notes. When I finished, he leaned back and spoke gently. Mrs. Johnson, what you're describing is financial fraud and abuse of trust. If you sign those forms, you give your son complete legal control. He could empty all of your accounts, and you would have no legal protection because you granted him access. The words hit hard, a truth I had sensed but avoided, now spoken clearly by a professional who had no emotional connection to my situation. What can I do? I asked. He leaned forward. First, do not sign anything. Second, report the unauthorized credit card and the missing funds. Third, change every password, every PIN, every code tied to your finances. Fourth, if you feel unsafe, consider requesting a protective order. A protective order against my own son. The thought pierced me. I whispered, I don't want him to face legal consequences. He's my son. Mr. Chung's eyes softened. Mrs. Johnson, he has already committed multiple crimes. The question now is not about getting him in trouble, it's about protecting yourself. I left the office with a folder full of documents and a heavy list of tasks. It was overwhelming, but beneath the exhaustion, something new was beginning to grow. Determination. I went straight to the bank. I changed every password, requested a new debit card, closed the fraudulent credit account, and filed an official dispute. The teller was patient and respectful. She never made me feel foolish. By the time I returned home, I felt drained, but also strangely free, as if a weight I'd carried for decades had finally started to lift. That night, Bryce called. His voice was tight, tense. Mom, we need to talk. Come to my house for dinner tomorrow. We have to resolve this. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. And once, I would have dropped everything to obey. But now, after everything I had uncovered, the only thing I felt was a steady, icy calm. I can't tomorrow, I told him. I'm busy. Busy? Mom, what could you possibly be busy with? What I'm busy with matters to me, I said calmly. There are other things that are more important now. The silence on the other end was sharp, tense, full of surprise and irritation. "You're acting really strange, Mom. I don't know what's gotten into you, but you need to stop being stubborn and sign those papers. This is for your own good." For my own good. Those words again, as if taking from me was somehow an act of love. "Bryce," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected, "I'm not signing anything, and we need to have a very serious conversation about a few things." "About what?" His tone shifted immediately, alert, guarded. "About money that left my account without my permission. About credit cards I never applied for. About utility accounts in my name at addresses where I've never lived." The silence that followed felt like a heavy weight pressing against my ear. I don't know what you're talking about," he finally said. His voice sounded controlled, but underneath it, panic trembled. "I think you do know," I replied, "and you should choose your next words very carefully. Mom, you're imagining things. You're confused. You need to talk to a doctor." There it was, the card he always kept ready, making me seem forgetful, fragile, incapable. "I'm not confused, Bryce," I said. "I have every document, every receipt, every statement, and I've already spoken with a lawyer." Another silence, longer, colder. "You talked to a lawyer?" His voice had dropped to a whisper, almost threatening. "Yes, and he explained everything, what fraud is, what's illegal, what you've actually been doing." "Mom, you can't be serious. I'm your son. Everything I've done was to help you." "Help me?" I said quietly. "You've taken from me for years. You've used my name, my credit, my trust, and you know it." "I never," he began, but I cut him off. "Yes, you did, and we both know it. The only question now is what we're going to do about it." I could hear him breathing heavy, uneven, like he was struggling to keep control. "I'm coming over," he said abruptly. "We need to talk in person." "No," I said immediately. "You're not coming here. If you want to talk, we can do it over the phone or with lawyers present." "Are you out of your mind?" he shouted. "Completely out of your mind. After everything I've done for you, after all the times I've worried about you, this is how you repay me?" "All the times you came to eat for free?" I said. "All the times you needed something? Because when I needed help, Bryce, where were you?" Before he could twist the conversation again, I hung up. I stayed there, the phone still in my hand, shaking not from fear, but from anger. Years and years of quiet anger that finally had a voice. That night, I slept better than I had in months, because for the first time, I had spoken the truth. I had drawn a line. And I was no longer the silent mother who let herself be stepped on. The next morning, I woke with a clarity that felt almost blinding. It was as if a heavy fog had finally lifted. I knew exactly what I needed to do. After breakfast, I grabbed my purse and left the house. I had a list in my mind, a map of every loose end I needed to secure. If Bryce thought I was a confused, helpless woman, he was about to learn how wrong he was. My first stop was the main bank where I kept my savings account, not my checking account, but the one I'd opened 30 years ago when I still dreamed of buying my own home someday. It held $20,000. Not much for a lifetime of work, but it was mine. I asked the manager to close the account. She hesitated, asked if everything was okay. I simply said I needed to make some changes. She issued a cashier's check and recommended opening a new account at a different bank for security. I took her advice. I drove across town far from anywhere Bryce had ever been with me and opened a brand new account, one only I knew about, one he would never find. Then I went to the utility company. I presented every document Mr. Chung had helped me prepare, the affidavit, my ID copy, proof that I had never lived at Bryce's address. The woman assisting me reviewed everything and assured me an investigation would begin immediately. The account would be corrected or closed. I would no longer be responsible for any of it. I walked out feeling as if an invisible chain around my chest had been removed. Next, I went to the credit bureau. I requested my full report. I wanted the truth, all of it. They handed me a thick packet. I sat in the waiting room and read it page by page. And there it was, another blow. A personal loan for $5,000 taken out in my name 2 years ago. a loan that had never been fully paid, a loan that was now in collections, $5,000. I felt the anger rise in my throat like something I'd tried to swallow for years finally coming back up. I highlighted every fraudulent charge, every unauthorized account, every debt created in my name. I filled out the dispute forms one by one, my handwriting steady and firm. When I finally stepped out of that office, it was nearly 3 p.m. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, but I didn't feel hunger. What I felt was purpose, strength, a fire that had been waiting decades to ignite. My next stop was the apartment of my old neighbor, Mrs. Bertha Washington. She was 70, had lived in the building longer than I had, and for many years she had been one of my closest friends. But in recent years, I had drifted away too focused on Bryce, too desperate to maintain a relationship that had already become one-sided. I knocked on her door. She opened it with surprise. "Ellie, what a lovely surprise. Come in." We sat in her living room. She offered me coffee and I accepted. She looked at me closely, her eyes gentle but sharp. "You look different," she said. "I can't explain it, but something about you has changed." And so I told her everything. Every discovery, every lie, every dollar taken, every sign I had ignored. I talked for nearly an hour, and she listened quietly, her face shifting between sadness and understanding. When I finished, she let out a deep sigh. "Ellie, I knew something wasn't right. Every Friday I saw him come over, how he treated you, how he acted like you were just there to serve him. But I never said anything. It wasn't my place, but I'm glad you finally see it." She took my hand. Her fingers were cool, but her grip was steady. "I need a favor," I told her. "I need you to be my witness. If Bryce tries to claim I'm confused or forgetful, I need someone who can confirm that I'm perfectly capable, that I'm clear-minded." She nodded instantly. "Of course. And more than that, if you ever feel unsafe, if you need a place to stay, my door is open." Her words hit me so deeply I almost cried. But I didn't. I had shed enough tears. Now it was time for action. That night, I organized every document I had. I placed them in a large folder, made copies, hid the originals, and left the copies in the folder. If anything happened to me, if Bryce tried anything, there would be evidence. Real, undeniable evidence. I also wrote a letter, a full account of everything I had discovered, every detail, every betrayal. I sealed it in an envelope with instructions for it to be opened only in an emergency. I gave it to Mrs. Bertha to keep. I felt like a commander preparing for a quiet battle, because that's exactly what this was. And I knew Bryce wouldn't back down. I knew he would come. He would insist. He would try to break my confidence, twist my words, make me doubt myself. But that woman, the one who always stayed quiet, was gone. She had died the night Bryce threatened me in my own kitchen. The woman standing in her place was stronger, more focused, more determined than ever. On Wednesday afternoon, while I was making tea, I heard a car pull up outside the building. I looked out the window. Bryce's car. And he wasn't alone. His wife was with him. Both of them walked with purpose, with determination. They weren't coming for a visit. They were coming to confront me. I set my teacup aside, took a deep breath, and waited. The doorbell rang once, twice, then again, sharper each time. I opened the door, but I didn't move aside. "We need to talk," Bryce said, his voice stripped of any warmth. "I'm listening," I replied. "Inside, Mom. We're not talking in the hallway." "No, we're not going inside. Whatever you need to say, you can say it here." His wife scoffed. "This is absurd, Ellie. Stop acting like we're your enemies." "You're not enemies," I said calmly. "Enemies are at least honest about their intentions. You're worse. You hide behind polite words while taking what isn't yours." Bryce stepped forward, furious. "How dare you, after everything I've done for you?" "Everything you've done for me?" I said quietly. "I have the records. I have the proof. I know exactly how much you took. I know about the credit cards. I know about the utility accounts. I know about every dollar that disappeared." He froze. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "And now," I continued, my voice steady, You have two choices. Either you return everything you took every cent, or I go to the police and file a report. His wife stepped forward. You can't do that. He's your son. Exactly, I said, and that's what makes this so painful. I gave him everything, and he repaid me by taking more. Bryce finally found his voice. You owe me, he shouted. My whole life I grew up without a father. My whole life I watched you work and struggle. That was your fault. You chose to raise me alone. I didn't ask to be born. His words hit like punches, but they didn't break me anymore, because now I could see them clearly for what they were: excuses, deflections, desperate attempts to dodge responsibility, the words of someone who knows he crossed a line and can't undo it. You're right, I told him. I chose to have you, and for many years it was the best choice I ever made, until it stopped being the best. But that doesn't give you the right to take from me. That doesn't give you permission to use me. I didn't take anything, he snapped. I only took what was owed to me. Nothing was owed to you, Bryce, I said quietly. I gave you everything you needed as a child. Once you became an adult, my responsibility ended, and it certainly was never my duty to let you access my money without my knowledge. His wife tugged his arm. Let's go. This isn't worth it. She's already lost. Lost. What an interesting word, as if claiming ownership of my own dignity was some kind of defeat. As if defending the little I had left made me unreasonable. They walked down the stairs without looking back. I closed the door behind them, and to my own surprise, I felt a strange, steady peace settle inside me. That night, Attorney Chung called. He told me the banks had confirmed the unauthorized charges, that the credit card debt would be erased, and that the withdrawals were under investigation. He said I had a strong case if I chose to move forward legally. I thanked him and hung up. I sat in my bare living room, a room with no TV, no fancy furniture, no luxuries, and for the first time in years, I felt rich. Rich in something no account could hold: self-respect, strength, the certainty that I had finally chosen the right path. The days after that confrontation felt strangely quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I drifted in a space between hurt and relief, anger mixing with a sense of freedom I wasn't even sure how to process. Bryce didn't call. He didn't show up, not once. And for the first time since he moved out, I wasn't waiting for him. I wasn't checking my phone every hour, hoping for a message. I wasn't inventing excuses for his silence, but even though he wasn't physically in my life, he wasn't entirely gone. Something in me pushed me to check his social media, something I had rarely done before. It always felt like invading his privacy, but now I felt I had earned the right to know what he was doing while I cleaned up the chaos he left behind. What I found made my breath catch. The day after our confrontation, he had posted a picture of himself and his wife at an upscale restaurant laughing, toasting with wine. The caption was about releasing toxic energy and surrounding yourself with people who truly add value. Toxic energy, as if I were the negativity he needed to escape, as if refusing to be taken advantage of made me the problem. And the comments, people praising him, telling him how brave he was, how proud they were of him for protecting his peace, how healthy boundaries were important. I stared at the glowing screen, stunned by the disconnect between reality and the polished story he was presenting. Those people had no idea that the person they were praising had taken thousands from his own mother. There were more posts over the next days, each one more carefully crafted than the last, like he was building a brand new version of his life for the world to admire. A gym selfie with a long reflection about self-care and investing in oneself. Meaningful words until you remembered he used money taken from me to pay for that membership and those expensive clothes. A photo of him working on his laptop, talking about discipline and the sacrifices needed to build a future, conveniently leaving out that this future had been funded by credit cards created in my name and utility bills I had unwillingly covered. But the one that shattered me was posted that Friday, the day he always came for dinner. He shared an old photo of us from when he was about 5 years old, a picture I didn't even know he had. I was holding him in my arms, and we were both smiling. The caption was a long message about how sometimes the people you love most can hurt you the deepest. How he had finally learned that love doesn't mean tolerating harmful behavior. How he was taking the difficult step of moving away from a toxic family relationship for the sake of his mental health. Reading those words felt like a punch to the stomach. He had taken our entire history, our real, complicated, painful story, and flipped it upside down. He cast himself as the victim, and me as the one who caused harm. The comments under that post were even more relentless than the ones before it. Dozens of people cheering him on, praising his courage, supporting his boundaries, sharing their own dramatic family stories, all of them reinforcing the fictional version of events he had created. And some of those names. Some were people I knew, neighbors who had seen him grow up, co-workers who had come to birthday parties at my house years ago, people who had eaten food I cooked, sat on my couch, laughed in my living room, all of them celebrating him without knowing that the person he claimed he needed to protect himself from was the same woman who had worked 2 jobs to pay for his college education. For days, I watched this performance unfold quietly, without reacting, because I understood the trap he was laying. If I commented, if I defended myself publicly, if I allowed even a hint of emotion to escape, he would use it as proof. Proof that I was unstable, that his boundaries were justified, that distancing himself was the healthy choice. So, I stayed silent. But every new post was like a cut made with precision. Not because I cared about strangers' opinions, but because it was painful to see how easily people accepted a well-crafted story without asking if there might be another side. The breaking point came when Bryce posted a story showing the house he and his wife had bought. He proudly filmed the renovated kitchen, the new furniture, the perfectly manicured garden, presented as the reward for their hard work and sacrifice. There wasn't a single mention that part of that house had been paid with money that wasn't his, with credit taken in my name, with accounts I had unknowingly funded, with withdrawals he had made behind my back. He displayed it all so confidently, as if he truly believed he had earned it. As if every piece of furniture, every new appliance, every stone in that garden wasn't partially built on deception and years of taking advantage of his own mother. Watching those polished snapshots of his life, I wondered how he slept at night, how someone could maintain such a perfect image while hiding acts that contradicted everything he claimed to stand for. Did he ever feel a moment of guilt? Did he ever pause between a fancy dinner and a gym session to think of me, alone in an empty house, selling furniture just to be able to afford basic necessities because my own son had drained me? But looking at his posts, watching how effortlessly he built and maintained this carefully curated public identity, I realized something crucial about Bryce, something I had probably sensed for years but never dared admit. He had developed the ability to live inside 2 separate realities. In one reality, he was the abandoned son who deserved compensation. In another, he was the self-made man who built everything himself. In one version, taking money was justified. In the other, he was the victim of a harmful family relationship. He had created such a powerful narrative in his mind that the line between truth and fiction seemed completely erased. It was cognitive dissonance so deep it bordered on self-deception. He wasn't just lying to others, he had begun lying to himself. And as I watched all of this unfold from the quiet shadows of my empty home, something inside me hardened, not with hatred, but with clarity. Because seeing Bryce not only take from me, but also rewrite our entire history, seeing him reverse the roles so publicly, casting himself as the wounded son and me as the source of his pain, made me understand there was no path back. No conversation that could fix this, no apology that could undo years of deception. The son I believed I had raised either had never existed in the way I imagined, or had been completely replaced by someone who could smile for a camera while tearing down his mother behind closed doors without a trace of remorse. The moment of reckoning came one Tuesday afternoon, unexpectedly yet inevitable. Because the truth always finds its way out, no matter how many layers of lies try to bury it. I was in Attorney Chung's office reviewing the final documents when he told me the banks had concluded their investigations, $17,000. That was the confirmed total of fraudulent charges over 3 years, 17,000. The number itself made my chest tighten, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Planning, intent, repetition, calculation. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It wasn't one mistake. It was a methodical, ongoing operation. My own son had spent years building a system of theft. Attorney Chung looked at me thoughtfully. "With this evidence," he said, "you have more than enough to press formal charges. But before you make that decision, there is another option you may want to consider." The other option, Attorney Chung explained, was to send Bryce a formal demand letter giving him one last chance to return the stolen money and compensate for the damages before I proceeded with more serious legal action. He told me that many victims of family-based financial misconduct chose this route because, even when the wrongdoing was severe, the emotional ties made things more complicated than cases involving strangers. But he also warned me. He said a letter like that could easily be misinterpreted not as grace, but as weakness, that Bryce might respond not with remorse, but with pressure, manipulation, and denial. I sat in that office for several minutes, staring at the documents spread out across the desk pages that captured, line by line, every unauthorized withdrawal, every fake account, every lie Bryce had built over the years. Part of me still carried a small, fragile hope that if Bryce saw the undeniable evidence, something inside him might shift, that maybe, just maybe, he would recognize the damage he had done. That some piece of the boy I had raised with so much sacrifice still existed behind the hardened surface he now showed the world. But there was another part of me, a stronger, clearer voice, that knew exactly how he would react. That part of me understood Bryce too well, understood that he would not see the letter as a chance to make things right. He would see it as confirmation that I wasn't capable of holding him accountable, that I still loved him too much to take real action. And he would use that time to cover his tracks, to twist the narrative even further, to present himself as the victim long before the truth had a chance to surface. I turned to Attorney Chung and told him I didn't want to send a private letter. I didn't want another secret conversation where he could manipulate the situation. I asked him to proceed with a formal civil lawsuit, one that would become a public record, a record that could be accessed by anyone who wished to know the truth, instead of relying on the fiction Bryce was spreading across his social media. The lawyer nodded, looking both surprised and impressed. I don't think he expected a woman my age to choose such a direct, decisive path. He said he would begin preparing everything immediately and that Bryce would be officially notified within 72 hours. I left his office with a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Power. The kind of power that comes from making a choice entirely for yourself, without asking for approval, without worrying about appearances, without shrinking for someone else's comfort. For the first time in decades, I chose to protect myself instead of protecting the feelings or the reputation of the person hurting me. That choice hurt, but it filled me with a sense of integrity I thought I had lost forever. The notification reached Bryce on a Thursday morning, that much Attorney Chung confirmed by phone. I wasn't there to witness his reaction, but I could imagine it clearly, the moment he opened the official envelope, the moment his eyes scanned the documented proof of every transaction, every account, every dollar he had taken. There was no room for denial. Not anymore. And I didn't have to rely on imagination for long. Within 2 hours, my phone began ringing non-stop, call after call, each one more frantic than the last. I let every single one go to voicemail. There was nothing left to say that wasn't already written in those documents. That night, when I felt calm enough, I listened to the messages. It was unsettling, almost darkly fascinating to hear the progression of his panic. The first message tried to sound composed. "Mom, this is a misunderstanding. We need to talk before this gets worse." The second was sharper, more urgent. "Mom, please call me. You're going to ruin my life. You need to think about what you're doing before you destroy your own son." As if I were the one destroying something. as if revealing the truth was worse than the years of deception he had built. By the fifth message, the mask had fallen. Bryce was no longer pretending to be calm or reasonable. By the fifth voicemail, Bryce had completely lost control. His voice was shaking with anger, spilling into thinly veiled threats. He told me I would regret what I'd done, that he had his own lawyers who would prove I was an incompetent old woman who didn't know what she was doing. He said he would fight this with everything he had, and that in the end, I would be the one who looked like the villain. I listened to every message from beginning to end, not with fear, but with a strange, detached curiosity. It was remarkable how quickly he shifted from pleading to threatening once he realized his usual tactics no longer worked. It was like watching someone try to control a situation, only to discover the steering wheel was no longer in his hands. The following days felt like a storm of legal and emotional movement. Because Bryce didn't stay quiet, he launched his own counterattack. He posted a long, carefully crafted message on his social media, claiming he was the target of a terrible injustice committed by a mother he loved deeply, but who was now inexplicably taking legal action against him. The post was crafted to inspire maximum sympathy, avoiding specifics, hinting at confusion, suggesting that I might be dealing with age-related difficulties. The reaction was exactly what he wanted. Dozens of comments flooded in, messages of shock, loyalty, encouragement, people telling him to stay strong, that truth always wins, that they supported him no matter what. I watched the entire performance with a mix of amazement and disgust. His ability to manipulate the public narrative even when faced with documented evidence was astonishing, but something had changed inside me. This time his public theater didn't affect me, because now I had something more powerful than his words, irrefutable documents, proof that couldn't be erased with emotional appeals or clever phrasing. Bryce's real unraveling began when his own lawyers reviewed the evidence. Attorney Chung contacted me and explained that Bryce's legal representatives had reached out to discuss the possibility of an out-of-court settlement, which meant one thing: they knew he had no real defense. They knew the evidence was airtight. They knew a public trial would expose every detail. That's when the cracks in Bryce's carefully constructed life began to show. Word spread. Conversations started. People around him began asking questions. Mrs. Bertha told me she had heard neighbors whispering. Some of the same people who once praised Bryce as the educated, successful son now spoke about him with suspicion. His wife, according to neighborhood gossip, was furious less about the morality of what Bryce had done and more about the damage to their social reputation. Arguments filled their home. Blame was thrown in every direction. The illusion of the perfect couple was beginning to crumble. Bryce continued calling me for weeks, but I stayed silent. There was nothing more to say, and my silence did something his anger couldn't handle. It showed him that I had moved past fear, past emotion, past the need to convince him of anything. I had stepped into indifference, and that was the final blow, because it meant he no longer had any power over me. 3 months after I filed the lawsuit, the final settlement was reached. The terms were exactly what Attorney Chung and I had agreed on as the bare minimum. Bryce had no choice but to accept. Going to trial would have meant every detail becoming public record and the real risk of criminal charges. His lawyers explained that clearly. In the settlement, Bryce was required to return the full $17,000 he had taken, pay an additional $5,000 in compensation, cover all credit repair costs, pay my attorney's fees, make verifiable monthly payments for 6 months, or the agreement would be void and criminal charges would proceed. But the part that mattered most wasn't the money. It was a clause I insisted on adding. One Attorney Chung initially thought was unnecessary, but one I knew was essential. Bryce had to issue a public statement acknowledging that he had indeed committed financial fraud against me and that every claim in my lawsuit was true and supported by evidence. Not a vague apology, not a half admission, not a distorted version. A public acknowledgement of the truth he had spent years burying, the truth he had replaced with stories and lies, the truth he never wanted the world to see, and now the world would. He resisted that clause more fiercely than any other part of the agreement. Because he knew exactly what it meant. Admitting the truth in public would shatter the polished image he had worked so hard to build, the image of the misunderstood, mistreated son, the image he had used to hide what he had done. But eventually, he had no choice. One Tuesday afternoon, the statement appeared on his social media. Brief, cold, clearly drafted by lawyers. But the truth was there, plainly written, that he had accessed financial accounts without permission, that he had opened credit lines using someone else's information, that he had made serious, harmful decisions and regretted them. The comments exploded. People who had once defended him unconditionally were now stunned and disturbed. Others who had quietly suspected something was wrong finally felt validated. I watched the commotion unfold online with a quiet sense of closure. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just the calm that comes from seeing the truth finally spoken where the lies once stood. The first payment arrived exactly on the date specified in the agreement. Every payment after that came just as punctually, because Bryce knew a single missed transfer would trigger consequences he could no longer avoid. And with that money, I did something I know he never expected. I didn't simply rebuild my savings. I didn't rush to replace the furniture I had sold. I bought a plane ticket. Because after 62 years of living for everyone else, especially for the illusion of a relationship that never truly existed, I had finally reached a moment where I could choose myself, where I could live in a way I never had before. I bought a small home in a coastal town 3 hours away. A house with 2 bedrooms and a little garden where I could plant flowers I had only ever dreamed of. A house paid in full with a mix of Bryce's restitution and the savings I had protected. When I signed the papers, it felt like rebirth. A new beginning, built not on sacrifice, but on justice. After the final payment was made, Bryce tried to contact me one last time. This time, I answered, because there was nothing left he could take. His voice sounded smaller, almost fragile. He asked if we could ever truly talk, if there was any possibility of rebuilding something. I listened. Then I gave him the answer I had carried inside me for months. I told him the son I had raised either never truly existed or had disappeared long ago. That the person now standing in his place was someone I didn't recognize and didn't want to. I told him I wished him peace and growth, but both would have to happen far away from me, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. There was a long silence, then a sound, maybe a sob, maybe a breath, and he hung up. That was the last time we spoke, because some doors once closed must stay closed, not to punish someone else, but to protect yourself. Today I live in my little house by the sea. In the mornings I drink coffee in my garden and watch the flowers bloom under my care. There is a peace in this simple life, a peace I never found in decades of exhaustion and self-sacrifice. I finally understand that real love begins with loving yourself, that no relationship is worth keeping if it forces you to give up your dignity, that no is sometimes the most loving word you can say to yourself. Mrs. Bertha visits sometimes, bringing neighborhood gossip and warm conversation. She says I look lighter now, more alive, like someone who finally remembers who she is. My days are my own now. I wake when my body wants to wake. I cook meals I enjoy, not meals meant to satisfy someone else. I read books I never had time for, and in the evenings I sit on my porch, listening to the ocean in the distance, feeling grateful not for what I've gained, but for what I've finally understood about myself. This is my victory, not the money, not the public statement. But the fact that I reclaimed myself after decades of believing a mother's worth was measured only by how much she could give and endure. I learned that boundaries are not cruelty, they are protection, and choosing your own peace is not selfish, it is wise. I closed that door on Bryce not out of revenge, but out of dignity, and that is what made all the difference. Did you enjoy today's story? And where in the world are you listening from? Tell me in the comments, I'd love to know. If this story moved you, you can support the channel by tapping the Super Thanks button. Your kindness helps me bring you more powerful, true-to-life stories like this one. On the screen, you'll find 2 more stories I think you'll really love. There are so many more waiting for you here on the channel. Don't forget to subscribe for new life stories every week. See you in the next one. With love and respect.